have an interesting. I think it's interesting.
I think it is too.
I think, as usual, you know, I had a problem with it, and I raised with you some of the issues.
Yeah.
But let's talk very briefly about the Community Reinvestment Act. I don't want to go into detail with it, other than to say, what you find in your piece is that people who claim that the CRA caused a lot of the subprime crisis are just wrong. I mean, that's your first point, correct?
Yeah. You know, there are a lot of studies out there that basically support that premise, but I cite one. And the reality is that, you know, a lot of people thought, oh, they made the banks go into lower income areas or whatever, but mandated by law, and all those loans went bad. Well, the reality is almost the opposite. Those loans actually performed better because they had more supervision.
Right.
They were government mandated, and so they were, you know, they were making careful loans at reasonable rates. They weren't subprime loans. They weren't predatory loans, and people paid them back. So actually, the neighborhoods affected by CRA did better in the financial crisis than, you know, some of the more tonier neighborhoods out there.
Although, you know, one of the issues that I would raise, and I encourage people to read David's piece, very, very interesting, it's on MarketWatch.com, is that, you know, it's very hard, especially when you're looking at the pools of data on these things, to draw very many conclusions, because, you know, I can give you a neighborhood and you can give me 5 exceptions for why it is or
Absolutely.
it isn't a certain way.
Absolutely.
You then turn your piece and you say, listen, if CRAs, you know, if this did not cause the subprime crisis, why is it still that African American, I believe Hispanic, customers
right.
of banks are paying much more in credit than others? And you basically kind of conclude by saying, you know, it's racism. I mean, that's where you come out, isn't it?
I think so. I mean, more important than sort of coming to the big, you know, bottom line headline statement,
right?
Which, you know, I do based on the information that I have.
Right.
I think the most important thing is that we need to realize that these numbers are very striking, and, you know, the government should be looking at this, I think, a lot more closely. The people who, you know, the Federal Reserve, this new Consumer Protection Bureau might be a perfect fit for this. The reality is that if you just take the numbers, and there are all kinds of caveats, such as credit scores aren't included, and da-da-da-da-da.
Right. The credit score, that's a pretty big caveat.
Well, it is, but if we take a look at these loans, and the reality is that for every white person who gets a loan where they're paying an outsized interest rate, there are 3 minorities, either African American or Latino, who are paying also that higher interest rates. In other words, the ratio is 3 to 1.
Right.
So minorities are more likely to pay these higher fees and higher interest rates. I think that's
right. You say it's a problem, but you draw the conclusion that whether it's intentional or not,
right.
you would use the defension of kind of institutionalized racism.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
institutionalized or systemic.
So let me ask you. Let me turn it this way,
yeah.
because this is a very hot button issue. It's been for a number of years. I mean, this is not really any new. There's nothing new about this. But let me ask you, if you're Jamie Dimon, you're the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, or you're the CEO of Wells Fargo, or the CEO of Bank of America, why in the world, other than trying to adjust for credit scores and risk, why would you know, what would be your motive, or the institutional motive, to pursue some form of what you would describe as racism?
The institutional motive, it would be that you can get away with it and make more money.
I see. So you would basically say, it's not, the banks are not necessarily accounting for risk. They're just thinking they can get away with it. I mean, that's kind of what you would say.
I don't want to suggest that this is intentional in any way, because we're just looking at raw data about who's getting the better deal.